You won't be able to believe where and how this tale starts. Picture this: a sunny morning in Atlanta's downtown, the city streets alive with people, rushing off to work, coffee houses overflowing, with that wonderful roasty scent of freshly ground coffee. And there, amidst the city sounds and activity, something took place that would transform one man's existence beyond all imagination.
His name?
Daniel Roberts, a guy who had it made, wealth, power, the type of success that people fantasize about. But what he lacked was the thing he most needed. His little boy, Ethan, was dying. 10 years old with a zest for life once, now fading away in a hospital bed. Doctors had done everything. Specialists passed through, and others came in, and Daniel had spent more than most people make in a lifetime. But nothing was effective. Now let me pose a question to you. What would you do if all the wealth in the world could not save the person most dear to you? Daniel emerged from his expensive car that morning, smoothing his suit jacket, bearing the world on his shoulders, and then he noticed her. A young woman, barely 19, sitting on the pavement outside a small cafe. Her clothes were tattered, her shoes scuffed, but her posture, untroubled, dignified. And when she looked up at Daniel, her eyes, oh, there was something there. Something Daniel couldn't quite put his finger on. She didn't beg. She didn't ask for money. Instead, in a gentle, steady voice, she said something so bizarre, so daring, that Daniel found himself freezing in his tracks. "Feed me, and I'll heal your son." Can you imagine a millionaire brought to a halt by a girl with nothing but starvation in her eyes? Daniel laughed. Oh, he laughed hard. "Heal my son, you," he said, shaking his head. Ooh. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. But here's the thing. She didn't blink, didn't retreat. She simply stood there, unflappable as ever, and said once more, "Feed me first. Then you'll understand. Now tell me, what would you do? Would you laugh and turn away? Or would you hear for a moment?" Because Daniel, he turned away. But that night, when the fever rose and his boy's breathing grew shallow, those words came back to haunt him. And here's the part you can't get past. What Daniel did next made all the difference. The man who believed he could purchase his way out of any problem sat in his car at dawn, wondering the question no parent ever wants to consider.
Oh,
What if this is my one shot? He went back to that cafe, and yeah, she was still waiting. And when she spoke once more, in that gentle voice, something in Daniel's heart shifted forever. Now don't move, because what I'm about to tell you will make you wonder about everything you ever thought you knew about hope, about goodness, and about miracles. You won't believe how this has all begun. Imagine this, a bright sunny morning in downtown Atlanta, where the streets buzzed with the rumble of cars, the voices of people hurrying off to work, and the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee wafting from a small corner cafe. Life was rolling along, as it always did, but for one guy, time hung still in anxiety. His name was Daniel Roberts, a made man who carried confidence with him like a skin. He was keen, proud, and sure of his position in the world. A man who believed that he had seen it all, every negotiation, every turn of circumstance. But on that typical morning, something remarkable was going to happen, something that would alter him for eternity. You see, Daniel possessed everything money could provide: luxury cars, a mansion, but life has a way of lowering even the mighty. For Daniel, that lesson arrived in the guise of his only vulnerability, his little boy, Ethan. Ethan was only 10 years old, alive, full of dream, when an unusual sickness came along to steal his smile and the sparkle in his eyes. It began with the fever, the weakness, the long nights spent in hospital beds surrounded by the whirring machines that beeped without a moment of consolation. Daniel had paid top dollar to bring in the finest physicians, hired specialists from all over the nation, but nothing helped. The boy he loved more than anything on earth was drifting away from, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Roberts couldn't do a thing. This morning his heart was weighed down as he climbed out of his shiny black car, fidgeting with his suit jacket like armor against this world that had grown so unforgiving.
Oh,
And that's when he spotted her. Sitting patiently on the curb outside the cafe was a young black woman, perhaps 19, perhaps younger, whose body was so slender, it seemed the breeze could lift her up. Her shoes were scuffed, her clothes tattered, but she exuded a quiet dignity that no adversity could remove. Her hair was drawn back tidily, though tired strands fell over her forehead, and when she glanced up at him, her eyes, calm, deep and unflinching, met his. At that moment, something odd moved in Daniel, though he couldn't call it yet. She didn't request money, didn't beg like many of those on the street. Instead, in a voice soft but strong enough to cut through the noise of the morning, she said words that would stop him cold. "Feed me, and I'll heal your son." For a second, Daniel thought he'd misheard. He blinked, taken aback, then let out a laugh, loud, sharp, and almost cruel, though he didn't mean it that way. He exclaimed, shaking his head in incredulity. "Young woman, what a joke is that?" But she didn't smile. She didn't even wince. Rather, she said it again, more slowly this time, as if she meant every last one of those syllables. "Feed me, and I will heal him. And tell me," there was something in the tone she used, something so serene, so absolute, that shook Daniel more than he cared to admit. For a man who lived on reason, on bargains, and figures, this was rubbish, complete rubbish. But why couldn't he simply walk away? Why did those words seem to be bearing down on his chest, ringing in his ears? Daniel shook his head once more, grumbled something beneath his breath, and started walking out of there. But as he headed towards his car, a notion stuck with him like a shadow.
what if?
He shook his head at himself for even thinking it. What if this girl might know something?
Why?
What if she could do what no one else in a white coat could? He waved it off as fast as it appeared, but in his mind, the seed had been planted. Because here's the thing about life, it has a knack for forcing the impossible into your face when you don't see it coming. And this was just the start. Would you have laughed too? Or would you have stopped and listened? Because what ensued next, nobody, not even Daniel Roberts himself, would have thought. Daniel withdrew initially. I mean, who would not? He was a man of logic, a man who had faith in science, in facts, in things you could see and touch, not fairy tales told by strangers on the street. And yet, reaching the sleek black car and grasping the handle, something in that girl's tone wouldn't let him go. It wasn't loud, it wasn't desperate, it was steady, calm like a river flowing deep and sure of itself. It sounded almost certain, as if she knew something he didn't. Daniel shook his head and cursed under his breath. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, and drove away, pushing the vision of her frail figure and bright eyes from his mind. But when night fell, and the world hushed, and city lights twinkled in the distance, Daniel found himself once again at the one place he detested the most, his son's hospital room. The air hung thick, with the clinical scent of antiseptic, the repeated whir of machinery, and the faint whisper of shallow breathing. Ethan rested motionless, his tiny body overshadowed by starched white sheets, face ivory pale, lips dry and cracked. Daniel sat beside his bedside, his giant hands cradling Ethan's small ones, and for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He had constructed empires, signed million-dollar deals, overcome obstacles that would destroy lesser men. But here, looking at the weak rising and falling of his son's chest, he was unable to do anything. And as the night progressed, the fever rose. The monitor let out a warning beep, and the nurses came running, their faces pinched, their voices hushed. "We've done all we can," one spoke softly, before abandoning him to that room of shadows and terror. And it was then that the thought returned, not like a soft whisper this time, but like a bell clanging in his head. "Feed me, and I'll cure your son." Daniel shut his eyes, rubbed a hand across his face, attempting to dispel it. It was madness, absolutely madness. But what else could he do? Money had not worked for him. Medicine had not worked for him. All doors he opened were slammed shut against him. And now, in the quiet, that eerie voice from a girl with nothing but hunger in her eyes felt like the final door. At dawn, pale and chilly, Daniel made a choice.
he never envisioned making. He left the hospital and drove, not to the office, not to the boardroom, but back to that small coffee shop on the corner of Peachtree Street. His knuckles were white around the wheel, his jaw clenched, his heart racing with a question he couldn't resolve. What am I doing? Have I gone crazy? And yet, when he came up and got out, there she was, exactly like yesterday, sitting in the same place, same tattered clothes, same tidy hair tied back with care, and those eyes, placid, unruffled, as if time itself couldn't budge her. Daniel approached her slowly, every step weighed down by doubt and desperation. She looked up before he could speak, and smiled faintly, as if she'd been expecting him all along.
"You came back," she said softly, and for a moment,
Daniel couldn't find his voice. Finally he asked, his words rough, "What's your name?" She tilted her head slightly, and replied, "Naomi." The name lingered in the air like a secret, soft but strong. Daniel swallowed hard. "Naomi," he stated, near automaton style, then pierced her with direct stares. "What do you mean? Heal my son? What are you talking about?" Her reply was a single sentence, plain, soft, firm. "Feed me first, then you'll see." And the manner in which she spoke, it wasn't a request. It wasn't a negotiation. It was like a fact, incised upon granite. Daniel had to catch his breath. He scanned her face for a whisper of deception, a flash of uncertainty, but there was none. Only serenity, only trust. And then he was the one who was small, standing there in his $1,000 suit, looking at a girl with only hope in her eyes. He hesitated, his thoughts a tempest of questions. Is this stupid? Am I being strung along? Or is this something else? The city rumbled on around them, horns blaring, people hurrying past, unaware of the moment that would alter everything. At last, Daniel took a trembling breath. He had no idea why. He had no idea how, but he spoke the words nonetheless. "Okay, let's eat." And in that moment, the world tilted, though he had no way of knowing that yet. And for each, because sometimes miracles begin in the most tiny ways. Would you trust a stranger if everything else has failed? Undefined, Daniel was going to. Daniel opened the glass door of the cafe, and the small bell over it rang gently as they entered.
Warm air filled with the scent of fresh bread, and roasting coffee beans contrasted sharply with the cold of the morning outside. Heads turned for a moment at the unusual duo, the fat man in his expensive suit, and the thin little girl in her tattered clothes. But Daniel did not mind. He nodded toward a booth by the window, the prime table in the establishment, and spoke softly, "Order whatever you'd like." She nodded, her eyes darting over the menu for a second before she replied, almost demurely, "Just some warm bread, soup, and water, that was all. No dessert, no banquet, only enough to quell the hunger." Daniel regarded her, bewildered. He'd been thinking she would take advantage, order the most costly item on the menu, but she didn't. When the food arrived, Naomi folded her hands, shut her eyes for an instant, as if saying a quiet thank you, then proceeded to eat slowly, intentionally, enjoying every mouthful of the plain meal. Daniel observed her, not able to tear his gaze away. There was something in the way she stood, silent, almost queenly, without the frayed garments and work-roughened hands. It was as if she held a secret the world didn't, some treasure she couldn't let anyone touch, and that disturbed him, more than he was willing to admit. She ate the bread, drank the last of the water, and then with no fanfare at all, set the spoon down, and regarded him. She looked at him, serene as ever, and in a voice that held no doubt, no hesitation, she spoke. "Take me to your son." Daniel stalled. The words hung in the air like smoke, curling and thick, unwilling to be dismissed. His initial reaction was to refuse. Absolutely not. His mind shouted it. What if she's dangerous? What if this is all a scam? What kind of father lets a stranger near his sick child? But then there was his heart. Oh, his heart was tired. Tired of doctors shaking their heads. Tired of watching Ethan's light fade day by day. And somewhere deeper, in a place Daniel didn't visit often, something stirred. A quiet voice whispering, "What if this is it? What if this is the one chance you've been praying for?" He swallowed hard, waging the battle within, and at last nodded. "Okay," he breathed, as if the word was someone else's. They stepped out of the cafe, the outside world living on, as though something phenomenal wasn't occurring. But within Daniel's chest, The world was turning over. They drove in silence, the roar of the engine vibrating through the gap between their minds. Naomi sat quietly, hands clasped in her lap, her eyes staring out of the window as the city streamed by outside. Daniel kept glancing at her every few seconds, questioning who she actually was and where she'd come from and why, of all individuals, she'd picked Ethan. When they arrived in front of his mansion, the gates opened automatically, and Daniel experienced, for the briefest moment, a peculiar pang of embarrassment. All that money, all those walls, and yet none of it could protect the one person she loved most. Naomi emerged from the car with unobtrusive ease, her bare feet slapping against the highly polished marble, as if she had been there forever. They proceeded through the high-ceilinged hallway, over sparkling chandeliers and works of priceless art, but Naomi didn't look at any of it. Her gaze remained forward, steady, until they hit the door of Ethan's room. Daniel opened the door, his heart thudding so loud, it blocked out every other noise. There he was, his kid tiny and delicate, so still that for an instant, Daniel thought he was too late.
Was too late. The pale light, coming through the curtains, painted Ethan in silver and shadow, his tiny chest expanding and falling with slow, shallow breaths.
Daniel was in the doorway, all his nerves screaming to call security, to put a halt to this insanity, to take Naomi and get her gone. But he didn't, he couldn't.
She just watched. Naomi crept closer, each step as silent as a ghost.
She slid down beside the bed and took Ethan's little hand, thin and cold to touch, and wrapped it softly between her own. Then she closed her eyes, and in that moment, the whole room seemed to change. The air was thicker, more substantial, but peaceful, like the world itself had suspended, holding its breath. Even the birds outside stopped singing their morning song, instead remaining quiet, a hush. Daniel's spine tickled with a shiver as he looked, unable to look away, suspended between fear and wonder. Naomi leaned in close and whispered, her voice so low it didn't quite cross. Little one, you are not finished.
Those weren't words that sounded like a plea. They didn't sound anything like hope. They sounded like a promise, like reality itself speaking in her. And Daniel, logical, sane Daniel, felt something deep within him break wide open. For the first time in years, he did not feel like he was the one at the helm. For the first time in his life, he felt something he could not define. What follows will make you wonder about everything you ever believed you knew about faith and about compassion. At first nothing happened. The room stayed still, silent, except for the faint hum of machines and the sound of Daniel's own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He stood frozen in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame so hard, his knuckles turned white. Every rational thought in his mind screamed, "This is nonsense. This is nothing. You've lost it, Daniel." He nearly rolled his eyes, nearly stepped in to put an end to this weird farce. But then, something shifted. So tiny at first, so soft he thought he was dreaming. Ethan's breathing, shallow and erratic for days, slowed, not ceased, no, steady, deep, strong. The jarring beeping of the monitor dwindled as his wee chest rose and fell in smooth cadence, like the tide finding its peace after a tempest. Daniel's lips parted, his breath arrested in his throat. As he gazed, his eyes flickered to the face of his boy, still pale. But, no wait, there was color now. A rosy flush staining those small cheeks, which had been white as a ghost for so long. And then before Daniel could even blink, Ethan's fingers moved. Not a spasm, not a trick of the light, an actual movement. His small hand, limp for weeks, gripped Naomi's hand tighter. Daniel gasped. His knees felt weak, like the floor had tilted beneath him. He took a step closer, eyes wide, heart thundering against his ribs. He wanted to speak, to shout for the doctors, to call someone, anyone, but no sound came out. And then it happened. The miracle that shattered every wall of doubt he had built around his soul. Ethan's eyelids quivered once, twice, and then snapped open, wide, clear, alive. Eyes that had long been dull now sparkled with sunlight on water. Dad. The word was little more than a breath, as fragile as air. But to Daniel it was thunder. He stood there, rooted, unable to move, unable to breathe. Weeks he had begged to hear the sound of his son's voice again. And now here it was, sweet and soft and real. His boy, his precious boy, was looking at him, awake, aware, alive. Daniel staggered forward, his eyes blurring with tears that seared hot down his cheeks. He fell to his knees, beside the bed, grasping Ethan's other hand, as if he would never let it go again. How did you? The words were wrenched out of him, harsh and splintered. He couldn't even get to the end of the sentence due to sobs choking his throat. He looked at Naomi, begging for answers, for a rationale that had meaning, in a world that no longer had one. But Naomi didn't seem surprised. She didn't even seem pleased. She only smiled, a gentle, understanding smile, with no arrogance, no enigma, only peace, and spoke. Sometimes healing begins with being seen and being nourished. Her tone was soft, like a lullaby, and yet there was a heaviness to her words that plummeted deep into Daniel's heart. He didn't get it, not exactly, but somehow those words sounded like the most real thing he had ever heard. He turned to Ethan, who sat up slowly, his small arms trembling but firm as he held out his arms to his father. Daniel swept him into his arms, burying his face in his child's hair, tears flowing freely now. He didn't mind if Naomi noticed. He didn't care about pride or authority, or what lay beyond that door. All that mattered was this, his son warm and breathing in his arms, whispering softly, "I'm hungry, Dad." A laugh broke out of Daniel's chest, wild and raw. And laugh broke out of Daniel's chest, wild and raw and full of joy. And for the first time in months, it didn't feel forced. It felt real. Behind him, Naomi stood quietly, watching them with eyes that held something Daniel couldn't name. Wisdom, maybe. Or grace. She didn't move. She didn't speak again. She didn't speak again. She just stood there, calm as the morning sky after a storm. And as Daniel rocked his boy gently, his mind spun with questions. Who was this girl? How did she do it? Why did she help us? And you're probably wondering the same thing right now. Who was Naomi? What secret did she carry that no one else knew? Why was Naomi? What secret did she carry that no one else knew? Why would a girl with nothing give everything? The reason, my friend, will leave you utterly speechless. Daniel could not help but stare at her. His boy, his son, was alive, smiling, breathing, thanks to this girl, who now stood silently, was alive, smiling, breathing, thanks to this girl, who now stood silently by the window, morning light soft and gentle around her like a highlight. For the first time in months, since the nightmare had started, Daniel experienced the weight crushing his chest lessen, replaced by something he had not permitted himself to feel in months. Peace. He blotted the tears from his cheeks with shaking hands, then stood up slowly, nearly unsteady, as if a man relearning how to walk. He faced Naomi, his voice cracking with unbridled gratitude, and murmured, "Anything, Sama." His voice cracking with unbridled gratitude, and murmured, "Anything. Name it, whatever you desire, it's yours. Money, a house, a car, a job, anything." The words spilled out of him in a burst, desperate and frantic to repay something that could never be, something that could never be repaid. He reached for his phone, prepared to wire thousands, millions, if that was what it would take. But Naomi just shook her head, looking calm, almost sorrowful, as if she had heard the offer before and were already rejected it 1,000 times. "I didn't do this for money," she told him softly. And her voice, "For money," she told him softly. And her voice was so rock solid that it stilled the hurricane in his chest. Daniel blinked, shocked. He couldn't get it. In his existence, everything came with a price tag. Business was transacted in numbers, not words. Loyalty was purchased, not given. And here was this girl, this stranger, who had just done the unthinkable. And here was this girl, this stranger, who had just done the unthinkable and asked for nothing back. Nothing. Why? He whispered, his throat constricted, his voice cracking on a word that he had never really asked anyone before. Naomi's eyes relaxed, her eyes holding him like an anchor. And then she uttered something that would be etched in his heart for eternity. "I was hungry, not hungry for food, but for kindness. I was hungry, not hungry for food, but for kindness. And I knew your son needed someone who believed in him, in life, in hope." The silence afterward was dense, sacred. Daniel felt something within him unravel. Years of pride, years of thinking that anyone revels, years of pride, years of thinking that power was all that mattered, that control was security. In this instant, in the quiet radiance of his son's laughter, he knew a truth no fortune could purchase. The greatest gifts of this life are free. He brought his phone down slowly, Shame and wonder intertwined in his chest. And for the first time in 40 years, Daniel Roberts, one of Atlanta's wealthiest men, felt poorer than poor, poor on the things that counted, and richer than rich, on the things he had nearly forgotten to remember: faith, grace, and the blatant generosity of a stranger. Naomi walked towards the door, her steps light, the plain generosity of a stranger. Naomi walked towards the door, her steps light, her presence as commanding as the dawn seeping through the windows. Daniel longed to turn her back, to beg her remain, to remind her that she had just saved not just his son, but his son. But before he could open his mouth, she faced him, of his soul. But before he could open his mouth, she faced him, her face calm, her voice carrying the gravity of something timeless. The world, she said slowly, is full of miracles. Most people just walk past them because they don't look the way they expect. The words settled deep, burrowing into the crevices of his mind like seeds that were waiting to germinate. He opened his mouth to answers, filled his mind like seeds that were waiting to germinate. He opened his mouth to answer, but there was nothing, because what do you say to something like that? And then she was gone, just gone, out through the great doors, into the golden glow of morning sun, her fading silhouette shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, until it vanished beyond the gates. Daniel remained there still, the resonance of her words wrapping around him like its seat. Daniel remained there, still, the resonance of her words wrapping around him like a second skin. Ethan's laughter behind him, soft and sweet, a hymn of life, rang out. He turned to gaze at his son, now sitting up straight, rosy cheeks, bright eyes, and for the first time, in months, Daniel felt tears that were not from fear's time. In months, Daniel felt tears that were not from fear but of joy. He took 2 steps and was across the room, embracing Ethan in his arms, holding him close to his chest, and his across the room, embracing Ethan in his arms, holding him close to his chest, inhaling the miracle that smelled like life, like home. And as he whispered vows into his son's hair, vows to never take another second for granted, Daniel understood he would never laugh at hope again. He would never pass by a miracle again. He would never pass by a miracle again. Not after this. So what do you think? Was it luck? Was it luck? Was it fate? Or was it something more? Because sometimes, my friend, sometimes the greatest thing you can do is take a moment and be kind. You know, life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Sometimes the answers we're searching for don't come from doctors, or money, or all the plans we think we've made. They come from something simpler, a gesture, a word, a stranger who reminds us that hope is still alive. We all have those times when we feel powerless, and the world weighs too much on our shoulders. And during those times, it's so easy to forget that kindness, simple kindness, can open doors that no amount of money or muscle ever can. Perhaps today, it's time to ask ourselves, it truly matters what we have, or the minutes we share, the hearts we touch. For at the end of it all, those little acts of love, that's what endures. So cling to hope, and never doubt the power of a gentle touch, a gentle touch, a gentle word, and never doubt the power of a gentle touch, a gentle word, or the simple act of caring.